My son thought I was just a lonely old man living on a pension. When my house flooded, he said, "Come stay with us, Dad, we'll take care of you." That night I heard him whisper to his wife, "Once he signs the papers, everything will be ours." Then one evening, laughing in front of his dinner guests, he said, "Honestly, Dad's more of a burden than anything else." He never knew the father he underestimated was still earning over $680,000 a year. Soon he would regret every word. Welcome, and thank you for being here on Dad Returns. Tell me in the comments what city, what country I read every single one. Note, some elements of this story are fictional, shaped to carry a message worth hearing. Names and settings are coincidental, but what this story leaves behind in you is not. My name is Walter Hayes. I am 69 years old, and the most expensive thing in my house is a coffee maker I bought on clearance 12 years ago at a Walmart 2 towns over. It still works just fine. I never saw the point in replacing something that does its job well. I live alone in a 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. The neighborhood is quiet, the kind of quiet that people in their 30s call boring, and people in their 60s call a blessing. My neighbors are a retired mail carrier named Jean on the left and a young couple with a golden retriever on the right. Jean waves every morning. The couple doesn't. That's all right. I don't need waving. Every day starts the same. I'm up at 5:30 bare feet on the hardwood floor, the kind of cold that wakes you up faster than any alarm. I shuffle to the kitchen scoop 3 tablespoons of ground coffee, Maxwell House the blue can, nothing fancy, and stand at the counter while the machine does its thing. While I wait, I look out the window at the backyard. There's a bird feeder out there that Margaret put up the spring before she got sick. I've been refilling it every 2 weeks for 7 years now. "Walter, you don't even like birds," she said to me once, laughing at herself while she hammered the post into the soft ground. "I like you liking birds," I told her. She turned around and smiled at me the way she did when she thought I was being sentimental and didn't want to admit it. Lord, that woman could say everything with one expression. She's been gone 7 years now. The feeder stays. After coffee, I read the paper, actual paper, delivered to the front step every morning by a teenager who throws it from a moving bicycle with surprisingly good aim. Then I walk. 2 miles, same route, same sidewalks. People always ask me if I get bored doing the same thing every day. I tell them there's a difference between routine and rut. Routine is what keeps a man standing upright when the world keeps trying to knock him sideways. Now I know what you might be thinking. A retired man, 3-bedroom house, Portland suburbs, Maxwell House, coffee. You're building a picture in your head. I know because I've watched people build that picture my whole life, and I've never once corrected them. Here's what that picture is missing. 31 years ago, I built a software company from a spare bedroom and a second-hand computer that had a fan so loud my neighbor thought I was running a leaf blower indoors. The company was called Hayes Logistics Systems, and what we did back when software still made regular people's eyes glaze over was build routing and inventory management tools for freight and warehouse operations. Unglamorous work. The kind of work that keeps grocery stores stocked and Amazon boxes moving the invisible machinery behind everything you order without thinking twice. In 2003, I sold the company. Not to the first buyer, not to the highest bidder, but to the right buyer, a firm that actually understood what we'd built. The number on that contract is not something I discuss at dinner parties, mostly because I don't go to dinner parties, but also because numbers have a way of changing how people see you before they've finished shaking your hand. What I kept after the sale was threefold. A minority equity stake that continues to generate value as the acquiring company grows. 2 software patents that I hold jointly, one related to predictive load optimization, one to real-time route adjustment, that the industry has been quietly licensing ever since. and a diversified investment portfolio managed by a man named Ethan Brooks, who has been my closest friend and financial advisor for 30 years. Ethan is the kind of man who reads a balance sheet the way other people read a novel, with genuine excitement about what comes next. Between the equity distributions, patent royalties, and portfolio returns, my income runs somewhere around $680,000 a year. I drive a 2014 Ford pickup with a dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot incident I've never fully gotten over. I buy my jeans at Costco. I tip well at diners. Nobody who knows me socially has any idea. "Walter, don't you think Ryan should know the full picture?" Ethan asked me once, maybe 5 years back, sitting across from me at his office with a coffee he'd paid $12 for and hadn't touched. "Ryan knows what he needs to know," I said. "That's not the same thing as what's true." "No," I agreed. "It's not." Ethan looked at me the way he does when he's already figured out what I'm going to say, but wants me to say it anyway. So I did. I wanted him to build something real, Ethan. Something he could look at and know in his bones that it came from him. Not from me. Not from money I handed him. From him. Ethan nodded slowly. "And if he doesn't," I picked up my coffee, "then I'll cross that bridge when I get there." That conversation was 5 years ago. My son Ryan is 40 years old now. He runs a logistics company of his own mid-sized operation out of Seattle, decent contracts, solid reputation. He built it from scratch the same way I built mine. And if I'm honest, the way a man can only be honest with himself at 5:30 in the morning, while the coffee maker gurgles and the birds argue over the feeder in the backyard, I am proud of him. I just don't always recognize the man he's become. I stood at the kitchen window that September morning, coffee in both hands, looking at the photo on the shelf above the sink. It's been there so long I sometimes forget to see it. Ryan at 8 years old, Margaret's arm around his shoulders, and me squinting into the sun with the specific expression of a man who was told to smile but forgot how. The three of us on a camping trip in the Cascades the summer before Ryan started 3rd grade. The summer everything still felt like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. "I thought I raised a good man," I said out loud to no one in particular. To the photo, maybe. To Margaret, maybe. To the birds. Nobody answered. They never do. I drained the last of my coffee, set the mug in the sink, and stood there for another moment with my hands on the cold porcelain edge, just breathing. Outside, a jay landed on the feeder and immediately scared off 2 smaller birds with nothing but attitude and nerve. I watched it and almost smiled. Then I heard it soft at first, the kind of sound that registers in the back of your mind before your brain catches up. A drip coming from somewhere below the kitchen floor. I frowned and crouched down, pressing my palm flat against the baseboard near the cabinet under the sink. The wood was damp. Not just damp, soft. I sat back on my heels and let out a long breath. In 69 years of living, I've learned that there are 2 kinds of problems. The ones that announce themselves loudly, so you can brace for them, and the ones that have been quietly getting worse for months before you ever notice the sound. This was the second kind, and something in my chest told me it wasn't just the pipes. By 7 in the morning, there was nearly an inch of standing water on my kitchen floor. I'd shut off the main water line at the street the moment I realized what I was dealing with, but the damage was already done. I stood in the doorway in my socks, one of which was now soaked through, and looked at the warped linoleum and the dark wet stains spreading under the baseboard like something breathing, and I thought, well, this is going to be a week. I called a plumber I'd used twice before, a straight-talking man named Dave Kowalski, who runs a 2-man operation out of a truck that always smells like solder and burnt coffee. Dave arrived by 9, crawled under the house, and came back out with the expression of a man who has delivered bad news so many times he's learned to do it without flinching. Main supply line under the kitchen and the laundry room, he said, pulling off his gloves. It's been corroding for a while. Wasn't a matter of if, was always a matter of when. How long to fix it? He sucked air through his teeth. 3 weeks minimum. Maybe 4 if I find more damage once I open up the subflooring. And Walter, you can't stay here while we work. The water's off, and we're going to have to pull up a section of the kitchen floor. I sat down on the porch steps and rubbed the back of my neck. 3 weeks. I thought about the Marriott over on Southwest Broadway, thought about Jean next door, and whether I could impose thought about a dozen practical options, the way a man does when he's trying not to think about the one option sitting quietly at the back of his mind. At 3:17 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Ryan's name lit up the screen. My heart did something embarrassing, jumped a little the way it does when you've been hoping for something without letting yourself admit it. I hadn't spoken to my son in 11 days. The last call had been brief, distracted Ryan clearly driving somewhere while we talked, half his attention on the road and half somewhere else entirely. Before that, 2 weeks of nothing. I answered, "Dad." His voice was warm in a way that filled the hollow space that call had left behind. "I just got off the phone with Dave Kowalski. He said he's working your place. What happened?" My hand tightened on the phone. "Pipe under the kitchen let go. Whole floor's going to need to come up." "God, Dad." A pause and then, "Listen, I want you to come stay with us. Claire and I talked about it this morning. We've got the space and it doesn't make any sense for you to sit in a hotel room for a month by yourself." Something in my chest loosened that I hadn't known was tight. "Ryan, you don't have to." "Dad, come on." His voice carried that particular impatience that means he's already decided and is waiting for you to catch up. "I'm serious. Pack a bag. We've got a room, we've got food, and honestly," a small laugh, the kind that sounds like the old Ryan, the one who used to call me on Sunday mornings just to talk, "I think it'd be good. You know, having you around." I looked out at the front yard, at the contractor's truck in the driveway, and the orange cones Dave had set up around the water shutoff. The house I'd lived in for 22 years looked just at that moment like a place that was done with me for a while. "All right," I said. "Thank you, son. Don't thank me. Just pack light. Claire just redid the guest situation up there, so—" He caught himself. "Just pack what you need. I'll text you the address even though you've been here 100 times and definitely don't need it." I laughed. Actually laughed the real kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere lower than your chest. After I hung up, I sat on the porch steps for another minute with the phone in my hand, and the afternoon sun cutting low and golden through the Douglas firs across the street. 3 weeks in Seattle. A chance to be near my son. To be in a home instead of a hotel room. I let myself feel good about it. I let myself believe it. Before I started packing, I made one call. Ethan picked up on the second ring. "Heard about the pipe situation," he said by way of greeting. Ethan always knows things before I tell him. 30 years of managing my affairs will do that. "Going to stay with Ryan for a few weeks," I said, "while the work gets done." A pause. Not long less than 2 full seconds. But Ethan Brooks is not a man who pauses. He thinks fast, speaks faster, and fills silence the way water fills a container immediately and completely. That pause meant something. "All right, Walter," he said. "Keep me posted." "Will do." "And Walter," another beat. "You need anything, you call me." "I always do." I hung up and told myself the pause meant nothing. Ethan was probably just distracted. Maybe on another call. Maybe reviewing a file. I told myself that right up until I was folding shirts into my duffel bag. One bag just what I needed, and found myself pausing at the dresser to take down the framed photo of Margaret from its spot between a stack of books and an old alarm clock I keep because she gave it to me. I wrapped it carefully in a flannel shirt and tucked it in the center of the bag where nothing could reach it. "I'm going to see our boy," I said to her face behind the glass. Then I zipped the bag, picked it up, and walked out to the truck. The drive to Seattle takes a little under 3 hours on a clear day. I had the windows down for the first hour, the cold September air coming in sharp and clean off the tree line. I thought about the camping trip in the photo on the kitchen shelf, the Cascades. Ryan at 8 years old, Margaret laughing at something I'd said that wasn't that funny. I thought about how Ryan's voice had sounded on the phone. Warm, present, like he meant it. I let myself feel hopeful the whole way there. I would later understand that the pause in Ethan's voice, that 1.5-second gap between my words and his, was not distraction. Ethan had known Ryan longer than Ryan knew. He'd seen things in my son's business dealings that I hadn't wanted to see. And in that pause, he had made a quiet decision not to say what he was thinking. He knew something I didn't. But I was 2 hours into a 3-hour drive. The mountains were gold in the late afternoon light, and I was going to see my son. I wasn't paying attention to pauses. Not yet. The house hit me before I even got out of the truck. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in one of those North Seattle neighborhoods where every lawn looks like it's being graded on a curve. Manicured hedges, stone driveways, exterior lighting that came on automatically at dusk, like the house itself wanted to make a good impression. Ryan's place was a 4,000-square-foot Craftsman with a 3-car garage and one of those grand front doors that says we have arrived before you've even knocked. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, engine ticking, as it cooled and let out a slow breath. Margaret would have leaned over and whispered something that made me laugh. She had a gift for puncturing pretension without being cruel about it. I missed that more than I could say. Ryan came out before I'd even grabbed my bag. "Dad." He jogged down the front steps. Still had that easy athlete's stride from his baseball days, and clapped me on the shoulder hard enough that I rocked forward a step. Come on. Leave the bag, I'll get it." "I've got it, Ryan." "Dad, I've been carrying my own bag since 1974. I think I can manage." He grinned, and for just a second, he looked exactly like the boy in that camping photo, wide open, easy, not yet whatever it was he'd become. My chest ached with something I couldn't name precisely. Love, maybe, or the memory of it being simpler. Claire was waiting at the top of the steps. She was exactly as I remembered, sharp cheekbones, highlighted hair, the kind of put-together that requires genuine effort, but is designed to look effortless. She smiled with her whole face, the way people do when they've practiced it. "Walter, it's so good to have you here," she said, and leaned in to kiss my cheek. She smelled expensive. "You must be exhausted from the drive." 3 hours isn't bad. I've had worse commutes." She laughed, a bright musical laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, come in. I'll show you where you'll be staying." The inside of the house was beautiful in the way that hotel lobbies are beautiful, impressive from a distance, impersonal up close. Everything matched. Everything was new. There were fresh flowers on the entry table that nobody had actually bought because they liked flowers. Claire led me through the main hallway past the living room with its sectional sofa and mounted television the size of a dining table, past the staircase that curved up to the second floor, and then past all of it down a side hallway I hadn't noticed toward the back of the house. "We actually had the upstairs guest room converted last spring," Claire said over her shoulder, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "Storage and a home office now. Ryan's been needing the space for work files. But this one back here is cozy, nice and private." She pushed open a door at the end of the hall. The room was small. Not tiny, but small, a full bed with a beige comforter, a narrow dresser, a single window that looked directly out at the side wall of the garage. The overhead light, had the particular yellow tone of a bulb that hadn't been changed in years. "There's a bathroom just across the hall," Ryan said from behind me, setting my bag down inside the door. "And you've got your own entrance out to the backyard if you want morning air. Real quiet back here, Dad." I looked at the window, at the garage wall 6 feet beyond the glass. "It's great," I said. "Thank you." I meant it as genuinely as I could, which wasn't as genuinely as I would have liked. I set Margaret's photo on the dresser, the one wrapped in the flannel shirt, and propped it against the wall. She looked back at me from that camping trip, squinting into the sun, arm around Ryan's 8-year-old shoulders, and I pressed 2 fingers gently against the glass. "What do you see?" I asked her the way I do when I need someone to tell me the truth. She just kept squinting, not answering. Same as always. That evening, Ryan had guests, 4 business associates, for dinner. He said people connected to a deal he was working. He stopped by the doorway of my room around 6 o'clock, already changed into a fresh shirt, holding a glass of wine. "Dad, we've got some people coming over tonight, business stuff, you know how it is. I'll bring you something up later, okay? Claire's doing that salmon thing she does." "Don't worry about me," I said. "I can find my way around a kitchen." He pointed at me, like that was the right answer, gave a quick smile, and disappeared back down the hall. By 8 o'clock, the voices from the dining room were loud enough that I could make out individual laughs. Ryan's the loudest, confident, and easy, the laugh of a man performing for an audience he likes. I made my way to the kitchen around 8:30, found half a rotisserie chicken in the refrigerator, some leftover rice in a container, a lonely apple that had seen better days. I heated what I could, poured myself a glass of water from the tap, and sat down at the small table in the kitchen. Not the dining room where 8 people were eating salmon and making deals, but the kitchen table, the kind of table where the housekeeper eats. I chewed my chicken and listened to my son's laugh carry through the wall. My jaw tightened. Something sharp moved through my chest, not quite anger, not quite grief, but something that lived between the two. I looked over at Margaret's photo, which I'd brought down with me without quite realizing I'd done it. She would have known, I thought. She would have walked into this house and known within 5 minutes exactly what kind of visit this was going to be. Me. I'd needed a night and a garage view window to start to understand. I washed my plate, dried it, put it back exactly where I'd found it, and went to bed to the sound of people laughing at my son's table, in my son's house at a dinner I hadn't been invited to. 69 years of early mornings had wired something into my body that no guest room and no garage view window could undo. My eyes opened at 5:45 without an alarm, the way they always do, like an old clock that keeps running out of sheer habit, even after you stop winding it. I dressed in the dark quiet as I could manage and padded down the hallway in my socks toward the kitchen. The house was still. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the low tick of a heating system, the distant sound of early traffic on the street outside. And then I heard Ryan's voice. Low, careful, the voice he used on phone calls when he didn't want to be overheard. Coming from the kitchen where the light was already on. I stopped just outside the doorway, back pressed to the hall wall, heart doing something strange and slow in my chest. I wasn't planning to eavesdrop. I want to be clear about that. I was a 69-year-old man in his socks looking for a cup of coffee. But something in the tone of my son's voice, something clipped and transactional and utterly unlike the warm, easy Ryan who'd jogged down those front steps yesterday, stopped my feet before my brain could tell them to keep moving. "How long does he actually need to stay?" Claire's voice. Crisp. Already 2 cups of coffee into her morning, I'd guess. "Until I get the paperwork signed," Ryan said. "The bank needs proof of consolidated assets before the loan goes through. His property alone bumps our collateral numbers significantly." My hand found the wall beside me. I pressed my palm flat against the drywall and held it there. "And he has no idea?" Claire asked. "He only has his pension." Ryan's voice was so matter-of-fact it nearly knocked me sideways. No hesitation, no lowering of the register, just the flat certainty of a man stating something obvious. He's not going to ask questions. He's just glad to be here. The sound that came out of Claire was half laugh, half exhale, the sound of a woman who has just had her assumptions confirmed and finds them satisfying. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably 10 seconds. My palm against the wall, my socks on the cold floor, the refrigerator humming. Here is what I did not do. I did not storm into that kitchen. I did not raise my voice or clear my throat or let my face do what it badly wanted to do, which was crumple like paper. Here is what I felt: a very specific, very cold kind of clarity. The kind that comes not from surprise but from recognition, from finally seeing clearly something you'd been squinting at for a while without wanting to name it. He only has his pension. 6 words. And in those 6 words, my son had told me exactly who he believed I was, exactly what he thought I was worth, and exactly why he'd called me up on that porch in Portland with that warm, easy voice and said it'd be good to have you around. I turned around, walked back down the hallway to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and pressed both hands flat on my knees, fingers spread wide the way I used to do in board meetings when I needed to think without letting anyone see that I was thinking. Margaret's photo was on the dresser. I looked at her for a long moment, my throat tight, my eyes burning in a way I refused to let become anything more. He only has his pension. I picked up my phone, dialed Ethan. He answered on the first ring. Of course he did. Walter. Not a question. Just my name in the voice of a man who has been expecting a call. Don't send any documents to Ryan's address, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Not now, not ever. And pull everything you have on Hartwell Group. A beat. The parent company, the logistics conglomerate. Everything, Ethan. Ownership structure, financial filings, board composition. Whatever's public and whatever you can find through your network. Walter. His voice shifted, careful now, the way he gets when he's worried and trying not to show it. What's going on over there? I looked at Margaret's photo, at the woman who would have known in 5 minutes what had taken me a night and a hallway to understand. I'm getting an education, I said. I'll explain when I know more. I hung up. Sat another moment with the phone warm in my palm, the morning pressing pale and gray against the garage view window. Then I stood up, straightened my shirt, and walked back down that hallway, louder this time, feet deliberate on the hardwood, so they'd hear me coming. I pushed open the kitchen door with one hand and looked at my son and his wife standing at the counter with their matching coffee mugs and their carefully arranged faces. Morning, I said, and my voice came out warm as a June afternoon. Any chance there's enough in that pot for one more? Ryan smiled wide easy, not one flicker of anything beneath it. Always, Dad, he said. Always. I poured my coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and asked Ryan about his week. He told me. Claire refilled her mug and smiled at the appropriate moments. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing that mattered, and the whole time underneath the table, where nobody could see my hand, was wrapped tight around the edge of my chair, knuckles aching, jaw set, holding everything exactly in place until I could figure out what came next. A week in someone else's house teaches you things a weekend never could. I learned which floorboards creaked and which ones held quiet. I learned that Claire ran the dishwasher every night at 10 o'clock, whether it was full or not. I learned that Ryan's home office door stayed shut from 7 in the morning until whenever his last call ended, and that knocking on it was not something people in that house did lightly. I learned my place. And I don't mean that bitterly, I mean it the way a man means it when he's been paying attention. So when Ryan knocked on my door on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week, already wearing his jacket, already holding his keys, already smiling, the particular smile he uses when he wants something to feel casual, I knew before he opened his mouth that this wasn't going to be just lunch. "Dad, let me take you out. Just the two of us. There's a great place downtown I've been meaning to try." My heart did something it had no business doing, lifted just a little, like a dog that's been kicked enough times to be cautious, but still can't help wagging its tail at the sound of the door. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. "Lead the way," I said. The restaurant was the kind of place that costs $60 a plate and tastes like 40. Good lighting, though, the warm golden kind that makes everyone look healthier than they are. Ryan picked a table near the window, and I noticed him angle his chair slightly before we sat down the way people do when they're thinking about sightlines for a photo. We ordered. The food came. Ryan asked me about Portland, about the house repairs, about what I'd been doing with my time since Margaret passed. Good questions. Attentive questions. I answered them and felt for stretches of maybe 4 or 5 minutes at a time like I was sitting across from my son, the way I used to, two people who knew each other actually talking. Then his phone buzzed on the table and something shifted in his face. "Dad, can I grab a photo of us real quick?" He was already picking up the phone. "Mom always said you never let anyone take pictures of you." "She wasn't wrong," I said. "But go ahead." He held the phone up, arm around my shoulder, and the shutter sound fired twice. Then his thumb was moving before I'd even straightened back up in my chair, typing, tapping, posting. I caught the screen for just a second before he set it face down. Making time for Dad every single day. Family first. My jaw tightened so fast I felt it in my back teeth. I picked up my water glass and took a long, slow drink. "Everything good?" Ryan asked, tucking the phone away. "Perfect," I said, and I smiled at him across that $60 table like I hadn't just watched him use me as content. We finished lunch. Ryan paid, made a point of it, waved off my reaching for my wallet with a "Dad, come on" that was warm enough to almost feel real. We walked back to the car, talking about the Seahawks, which neither of us cares that much about, but both of us know enough to fill 10 minutes. The drive home took 23 minutes. I counted. We were barely through the front door when Ryan's phone rang. He looked at the screen, looked at me, and said, "Sorry, Dad, I have to grab this. It's a client." He was already moving toward his office. "Of course," I said to his back. The door clicked shut. I stood in the entryway of my son's house in my jacket, keys in hand that I didn't need, and let the silence of the house settle around me like something physical. By 6 o'clock, the smell of whatever Claire was making for dinner drifted through the house, something with garlic and butter, something that cost more than rotisserie chicken and rice. I heard voices in the dining room. Not loud, not excluding. Just present the way sounds are when they belong to a room you haven't been invited into. I went to the kitchen. Found the leftover salmon from 2 nights ago, a heel of sourdough bread, half an avocado that had seen better days. I put it together into something resembling a meal and sat down at the kitchen table, the small one, the one tucked against the wall near the back door, where nobody could see me from the hallway. I ate with my fork scraping quiet against the plate, and I thought about that caption. Family first. The food turned to something tasteless in my mouth. My chest felt hollowed out, not by anger, not yet, but by something older and quieter. The particular grief of watching someone you love be exactly who you were afraid they'd become. I washed my plate, dried it, set it back where I found it. Then I walked to the window above the kitchen sink and looked out at the backyard, at the dark lawn and the tree line. And I thought about the bird feeder in Portland that nobody was refilling while I was here. Behind me from the dining room, I heard Ryan laugh, that big, easy laugh that fills a room. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. The box had been sitting in the corner of my room since the day I arrived. A shoebox-sized container I'd grabbed from the top shelf of my closet back in Portland, stuffed it with the things I didn't want to leave unattended in an empty house during 3 weeks of plumbing work. Nothing valuable in the way that a bank would understand it, but valuable the way that 69 years teaches you things are valuable, which is to say, irreplaceable. On a Thursday morning in the second week, I woke up, swung my legs off the bed, reached for it in the corner out of habit. It wasn't there. I sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the empty corner for a full 5 seconds before I stood up, checked under the bed, checked the narrow closet, checked behind the door. I even opened the dresser drawers, which made no sense, but panic will do that to a person. Gone. I found Claire in the kitchen, already dressed, coffee in hand, reading something on her phone, with the focused expression of a woman working through a to-do list. Claire, I kept my voice even. There was a box in my room in the corner by the window. Do you know where it went? She looked up with the particular brightness of someone who is about to tell you something they think is good news. Oh, that. I was clearing out that corner yesterday. We're planning to use the room for something else once the repairs at your place are done, and I thought those were just storage things, extra odds and ends. I put them out with some other old items. We had a neighborhood pickup for things people can come take. She waved her hand in the direction of the driveway. I think most of it went pretty fast. The room tilted, just slightly, the way it does when your body understands something before your brain has caught up. What was in it, Claire? My voice came out quieter than I intended. Specifically. She set her coffee down, thinking back with the expression of someone trying to remember what they had for lunch 2 weeks ago. Let me see. There was an old binder, looked like photocopies of something technical. Some kind of floppy disk in a plastic case, ancient looking. A picture frame wood, kind of plain. And a small jewelry box, I think. Was any of that actually important? My hand found the counter beside me. I gripped the edge hard enough that the tile pressed white marks into my palm. That binder was the original printed source code for the first version of Hayes Logistics software, the version I wrote by hand in 1987. Sitting at a kitchen table in a rented apartment 3 months behind on rent, certain I was either building something real or making the biggest mistake of my life. The floppy disk held the prototype demo I used to pitch my first investor. The frame held the photo of Margaret and me on our wedding day, not a copy, not a scan, the actual photograph, the only one I had, where the light caught her face exactly right. And the jewelry box held her engagement ring, which I had been carrying with me in one form or another for 7 years, because I couldn't bring myself to put it anywhere that felt like letting go. Yes, I said. It was important. Something crossed Claire's face, not remorse exactly. More like the recalibration of a person who has just realized a miscalculation. Oh, Walter, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I genuinely thought it was just old. It's fine, I said. Don't worry about it. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and called Ethan. My hands were not steady. I noticed that about them the way you notice weather from a slight distance with grim acknowledgement. I need you to find some items that may have been posted on local buy-sell sites in the Seattle area, I said when he picked up. Possibly Craigslist, possibly Facebook Marketplace. A printed source code binder looks technical, probably labeled Hayes Systems. A floppy disk in a clear plastic case, and a wooden picture frame wedding photo inside. Ethan didn't ask why. He never asks why when my voice sounds like this. Give me an hour, he said. It took 40 minutes. He called back while I was still sitting on the same spot on the mattress, Margaret's empty space on the dresser where her photo should have been, staring back at me like an accusation. Found them, Ethan said. Posted this morning, separate listings. The binder's going for $12. The disc for $8. The frame, Walter, someone already bought the frame. My throat closed. Just closed the way a fist closes, fast and involuntary, and I had to press the phone hard against my ear and breathe through my nose for a moment before I could speak. "Buy the binder and the disc," I said, "and find the frame, whatever it takes. Already on it." I got the binder and the disc back. By that afternoon, Ethan arranged local pickup, paid cash, had them left at the front desk of a pharmacy 2 blocks from Ryan's house. I walked there myself in the thin October rain and stood outside for a moment with the binder under my arm and the disc in my jacket pocket, the rain coming down soft and cold on my shoulders. The frame took 3 more days. Ethan tracked the buyer through the listing, a college student who'd wanted it for a school project and hadn't yet replaced the photo inside. She sold it back for $25 and seemed genuinely puzzled by how relieved I looked when I handed her the bills. I carried Margaret's photo back to the room by the garage and set it on the dresser with both hands, carefully, like setting down something that had been through enough already. "There you are," I said. That night, sitting at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't particularly want, I heard Ryan on the phone in his office, voice low, clipped the tone he used when he thought no one was listening. "The paperwork needs to be done by end of October," he said through the closed door. "I need his signature before the bank deadline." I wrapped both hands around my mug. The ceramic was warm against my palms. I held on to it and thought about a box full of things my son's wife had given away without asking, and a signature my son needed without understanding, and a company called Hartwell Group that Ethan had started pulling files on 3 days ago. And I thought the end of October isn't that far away, but it's far enough. That Saturday, Ryan had 3 of his business associates over for dinner. I know because I heard them arrive, 2 cars pulling into the driveway, doors closing, voices carrying that particular energy of men who are about to spend an evening talking about money and calling it conversation. I heard Claire's bright, practiced laugh from the entryway, the clink of glasses being set out, the low thud of good wine being uncorked. I was not invited to the table. I had learned by then to stop expecting it. I lay on the bed in the room by the garage with the light off, and a book open across my chest that I wasn't reading. The wall between my room and the dining room was thin enough that I could hear the rhythm of the conversation, even when I couldn't make out the words. And then Ryan's voice rose the way it does when he's telling a story he's proud of, and the words came through clearly enough that I could have recited them back. "I built this company from the ground up," he said. "No investors, no safety net, no connections handed to me. Every single client I have, I went out and I earned." Murmurs of appreciation from around the table. Someone said that's the only way to do it. Someone else laughed. I stared at the ceiling, and then something happened that I wasn't expecting. Not anger, not bitterness, but something deeper and older, like a seam giving way. My chest ached in the specific way it aches when you love someone and grieve for them at the same time. Because I remembered. 3 times I thought lying in the dark with the book still open across my chest. 3 times over 14 years I had put my hand under him when he was falling quietly, without his knowledge, without ever letting him see the hand. He had believed every single time that he had done it alone. And maybe that was my failure, not his. Maybe I had loved him in a language he never learned to read. From the dining room, Ryan was still talking. "People always want to know my secret," he said, and his voice had that particular ringside quality, the quality of a man performing for an audience he's won. "Honestly, I just outworked everyone else. Nobody gave me anything I didn't earn." Something stung behind my eyes. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and breathed through my nose, slow and deliberate, until the feeling passed. 3 times, Ryan," I said to the ceiling, so quiet that even I could barely hear it. 3 times I caught you, and you never even knew you were falling." The dinner went on for another 2 hours. I heard the goodbyes around 10 handshakes at the front door, cars starting in the driveway, the house settling back into its nighttime quiet. Footsteps came down the hall. They slowed outside my door, stopped. My heart rate climbed. I watched the strip of light under the door, waiting for the knock, waiting for the handle to turn, waiting for my son to open that door and just check on me. Just look in. Just be the man I used to think I was raising. The footsteps moved on. I listened to them fade down the hallway, and then I turned onto my side and looked at Margaret's photo on the dresser, her face catching the pale light from the window. "He walked right past," I told her. Her expression didn't change, but she'd never needed words to make a point. Before I tell you what Walter decided to do next, drop a "still here" in the comments, so I know you're with me. Because what comes next is the part where everything starts to shift, and I don't want you to miss it. And a quick note, the story ahead contains some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. It may not reflect every detail exactly as it happened. If that's not your kind of content, no pressure at all to step away now. But if you're staying, hold on tight. Ryan left for a business trip on Monday morning, 3 days meeting with potential investors in Chicago. Or so he told me over coffee, with that easy, distracted energy of a man whose mind is already at the airport. "You'll be fine here, Dad," he said, pulling on his jacket and checking his phone simultaneously. "Claire's around. Help yourself to whatever." "I always do," I said. He was out the door in under 4 minutes. I watched his car back out of the driveway and disappear around the corner, and then the house went quiet in a different way than it usually did, quieter somehow, with just Claire and me inside it. I found out what kind of quiet that was going to be by 9 o'clock that morning. I tried to look something up on my phone and got the spinning wheel that means no connection. I walked out to the living room where the router sat on the media console, lights blinking normally, and asked Claire, who was at the kitchen island with her laptop, whether the Wi-Fi was down. She looked up with the expression of someone who has been expecting this question. "Oh, we changed the password this morning, actually. Security update. I'll get it to you later today." She smiled and looked back at her screen. She did not get it to me later that day. I used my cell data and said nothing about it. Tuesday morning. I turned on the shower in the narrow bathroom across from my room. The water ran cold. I waited. It stayed cold. I stood there with my hand under the stream for a full 60 seconds, the cold biting up my wrist and into my forearm before I accepted what I was dealing with and stepped in anyway. I had spent a winter in a National Guard training facility in Wyoming in 1978, where the hot water worked for exactly 11 minutes a day if you got there first. I was not going to be defeated by a suburban Seattle bathroom, but I noticed. I cataloged it. I filed it next to the Wi-Fi password, and the dinner I hadn't been invited to, and the box of Margaret's things that had ended up on a stranger's Facebook listing, and I let the shape of it become clear. Claire was not shouting. She was not threatening. She was doing something much more precise than that. She was making the perimeter of my life in that house smaller and quieter and colder 1 degree at a time. I came back to my room after the shower to find my duffel bag moved from the chair where I'd left it to the floor by the door. Not emptied, not damaged, just moved. Positioned, you might say. The way you position a suitcase when you're hinting at something without having to say it out loud. I picked it up and set it back on the chair. That afternoon, I reached for Margaret's photo on the dresser. It wasn't there. My stomach dropped so fast it was almost physical, like stepping off a curb you didn't see. I opened the closet, not there. I checked under the bed behind the dresser on the windowsill. I opened the bathroom door across the hall and looked on the counter. I found Claire in the hallway outside the kitchen. Claire, my voice came out flat and controlled the way it does when I'm working hard to keep it that way. There was a photo on my dresser, small frame wood, a woman. She turned with that same composed, helpful expression. Oh, I noticed it was collecting dust and thought I'd move it somewhere safer. I think it's in the storage closet at the end of the hall. She gestured vaguely. I'll grab it for you tonight, I promise. Something fierce and cold settled into my chest, down through my ribs, and into my stomach the way a stone settles to the bottom of cold water. I looked at Claire, really looked at her, maybe for the first time the way you look at something when you finally stopped telling yourself it's something else. Tonight is fine, I said. Thank you, Claire. I walked back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed where Margaret's photo was not on the dresser, and called Ethan. Ethan, I said the moment he picked up. Where are we on Hartwell Group? I heard him pull up something on his computer. Michael Grant confirmed the controlling stake is available. 34%. He's been cautious about who he approaches, wants a strategic partner, not just capital, someone who understands the industry from the inside. A pause. Walter, are you sure about this? More sure than I've been about anything in years, I said. Set up a meeting as soon as Grant can do it. There's something else you should know, Ethan said carefully. Ryan's company has submitted a preliminary partnership inquiry to Hartwell. He's looking at a deal that would bring Hartwell's logistics network into his distribution structure. My hand tightened on the phone until the case creaked. I know, I said. Set up the meeting, Ethan. After I hung up, I sat in that room with the moved duffel bag back on the chair where it belonged, and the empty dresser where Margaret's face should have been. And I opened my notebook to the page of figures I'd been building for 2 weeks. I ran the numbers again. Slowly. Carefully. The way I used to run numbers in the early days of Hayes software, when getting them wrong wasn't an abstraction, it was the difference between making payroll and not. They still added up the same way. That evening, Ryan came home from Chicago a day early, rolling his suitcase through the front door with the look of a man who had either won something or was about to try. He found me reading in the kitchen and pulled out the chair across from me. Dad! He leaned forward, hands folded on the table, using the voice he must use in boardrooms. Warm, direct, no excess. I need to talk to you about something. Some paperwork I'd like your help with. He glanced at his watch. Not tonight, it's late and I just got in, but tomorrow morning. Would that work? I looked at my son across the kitchen table at the confidence in his jaw, the calculation just visible behind the warmth in his eyes. And I felt something in my chest that was not quite grief and not quite love, but was made of both. Of course, son, I said. Tomorrow morning is fine. He clapped the table once satisfied and stood up. Good. Get some sleep, Dad. He walked out of the kitchen, and I listened to his footsteps go up the stairs, the sound of the bedroom door closing, and then nothing but the refrigerator humming, and the notebook open in front of me with its column of numbers underlined twice at the bottom. I knew what the paperwork was going to say before he'd even brought it up, and I already knew exactly what I was going to do when he slid it across the table. Ryan came to my door at 8:30 the next morning, carrying a leather folder the color of dark mahogany, the kind of folder that costs more than my grocery bill for the month, and is designed to make everything inside it look inevitable. He'd also brought coffee. 2 mugs, both steaming, set down on the small table in my room, with the practiced ease of a man who has learned that warm gestures open doors faster than cold ones. Morning, Dad. He pulled the chair from the desk and sat across from me, unhurried, the picture of a son stopping by to chat. Sleep okay? Fine, I said. You? Good, yeah, good. He set the leather folder on the table between us, smoothed the cover with one hand, and looked at me with that boardroom warmth, direct, reassuring, already 3 steps ahead. So I wanted to talk to you about something I've been meaning to bring up. It's nothing complicated, I promise. He opened the folder. The documents inside were clean, professionally typeset, clipped together with a silver binder clip. At the top of the first page, in clean legal font, consolidated estate planning agreement and asset management authorization. My attorney put this together, Ryan said, leaning forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Basically, what it does is fold your property into a family trust structure. It protects everything legally, makes sure there are no complications down the line with probate, that kind of thing. Standard stuff, honestly. A lot of people our age do this. I picked up the documents, put on my reading glasses, and I read, not skimmed. Read. Every paragraph, every subclause, every piece of language that lawyers hide things inside when they don't want you to find them on the first pass. Ryan talked while I read. He explained things I hadn't asked him to explain, which is what people do when they're nervous about what you might find. He talked about the tax advantages of trust structures, about how his own attorney had explained it as a best practice for families with property assets, about how straightforward the whole thing was. I turned to page 4. There it was. Section 7, subsection B, in language that was technically clear once you understood what you were looking at. Upon execution of this agreement, Ryan Thomas Hayes shall be designated sole trustee and primary beneficiary with full authority to manage, leverage, or transfer any assets held within the trust at his discretion. Leverage. That was the word. One word buried in a subordinate clause on page 4 that told me everything I needed to know about what this document was actually for. Ryan wanted to use my property, my home, my assets as collateral for a bank loan. And once I signed this, he'd have the legal authority to do exactly that without asking me again. I set the papers down, took off my reading glasses, picked up my coffee mug, and held it in both hands, letting the warmth work its way into my fingers. "Who's the attorney who drafted this?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which I was grateful for. Ryan gave me a name. A firm in downtown Seattle sounded reputable. I nodded. "I'd like to have my own attorney look at it before I sign anything," I said. "That's just how I handle documents, Ryan. Has been for 40 years. Something moved across his face fast there, and gone like a cloud crossing the sun. He recovered immediately, and I'll give him this, the recovery was good. "Of course, Dad. That makes total sense." He smiled, reached out, and closed the folder with one smooth motion. "Who's your attorney? I can have mine reach out directly, might speed things up." "Diane Whitmore," I said. "She's handled my affairs for 30 years. I'll reach out to her myself." Ryan nodded, stood up, picked up the folder. His jaw was set in a way that had nothing to do with the smile still on his face. "No rush," he said. "Take whatever time you need." He left my room, and I heard his footsteps go down the hall, with a precision that told me he was working hard to keep them from moving faster. I waited until I heard his office door close. Then I picked up my phone and called Diane Whitmore. Diane had been my estate attorney since 1995. A sharp, unhurried woman who had the gift of making complicated things sound simple, and simple things sound exactly as simple as they were. She answered on the second ring. "Walter, it's been a while." "Diane, I need you to look at something. I'm going to photograph some documents and send them to your secure line. Don't call me back on this number, I'll call you from outside the house." A beat of silence. Then, in the dry, steady voice of a woman who has heard many things in 30 years of law. "Should I be concerned? Not yet," I said. "But I want you looking at this before I touch a pen." "Send it over," she said. "I'll call you this afternoon." I photographed every page of the agreement, sent it through, and went back to my bed and sat there with my hands on my knees, and my jaw set tight enough that I could feel the pressure in my back teeth. That afternoon, around 4 o'clock, I walked to the end of the block and called Diane from the sidewalk in the thin October air. "The trust structure itself is legitimate," she said without preamble. "Standard language properly executed, but Walter subsection 7b gives your son complete leveraging authority over any asset folded into this trust. He could use your property as collateral for any loan he chooses without further authorization from you. You'd have no recourse once you signed." "I know," I said. "You're not going to sign it." "I am not going to sign it." "Good." I could hear her clicking her pen, the same nervous habit she'd had for 30 years. "Walter, what's going on over there?" I looked up the street at the line of manicured houses going dark in the early evening. "My son needs an education," I said, "and I'm starting to think I'm the only one who can give it to him." As I walked back to the house, I heard Claire's voice through the kitchen window. She was on the phone, her voice tight and clipped. "He didn't sign it. Ryan needs to push harder. The bank deadline is November 1st. I climbed the porch steps and went inside. November 1st was 17 days away, and I had just made a phone call that Ryan didn't know about to a woman who had been protecting my interests for 30 years. The deadline was his. The timeline was mine. I want to tell you something about the weeks that followed that morning with the leather folder, something I only understand now, looking back, the way you understand a road better from the rearview mirror than through the windshield. While I was sitting in that room by the garage watching and waiting, Ryan was running his own race. And he was running it in a direction that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the man he'd decided to become. I didn't know most of what I'm about to tell you until weeks later. Some of it from Ethan, some of it from documents I eventually had access to, some of it from Ryan himself in a conversation neither of us expected to have. But I'm telling it to you now the way I eventually put it together, because without it, the rest of this story doesn't make sense. Ryan's company had been in serious conversations with Hartwell Group, a 40-year-old logistics conglomerate, 23 states, serious federal contracts, the kind of operation that takes decades to build, and that everyone in the industry knows by name. Ryan wanted to sell 40% of his company to Hartwell in exchange for capital and network access. It would have been the biggest deal of his career. The problem was the numbers. Ryan's actual revenue figures for Q2 and Q3 of that year were solid, not spectacular, but honest. The kind of numbers that tell a story of a well-run mid-sized company with good fundamentals and moderate growth. Not the kind of numbers that make a company like Hartwell reach for its checkbook. So Ryan asked his CFO to make some adjustments. I'm not going to dress that up. He inflated the revenue figures by 22%, reclassified a short-term debt of $1.8 million into a category that made it look like an operational investment rather than a liability, and restructured several line items to project a growth trajectory that the actual numbers didn't support. He told himself it was temporary, that once the Hartwell deal closed and the capital came in, the real numbers would catch up to the projected ones. That this was the kind of thing everyone did in the room before the big deals got made. That's what people tell themselves. I know because I've been in those rooms. Meanwhile, Claire had driven out to Bellevue on a Wednesday afternoon and put $85,000 down on a house. Not our house, not any house we'd ever talked about together as a family. A 4,000 square foot property in one of those new Bellevue developments where the homes looked like they were designed by someone who had only ever seen houses in magazine spreads. Total price $2.4 million. The deposit was non-refundable past 30 days. She was so certain the Hartwell deal was going to happen that she had already picked out where the dining room table was going to go. I found out about all of this from Ethan, who pulled it together from his due diligence contacts over the course of the following week. When he told me sitting across from me in the lobby restaurant of my eventual hotel, I felt something in my chest that was not satisfaction. It was the specific, painful weight of watching someone you love dig a hole they can't see the bottom of. "There's more," Ethan said. He had a way of saying there's more that made the air in a room feel heavier. Ryan's company also submitted a formal partnership inquiry to Hartwell last week. He's not just trying to sell equity, he wants Hartwell's logistics network folded into his distribution structure. He's positioning himself as the operational engine. My coffee cup was halfway to my mouth. I set it back down. "He went to Hartwell," I said. "3 weeks ago. He's been in preliminary talks with Michael Grant, Hartwell's incoming CEO sharp man. Been restructuring the company for 2 years. Grant is interested, but cautious. He's done his research." Ethan looked at me across the table. "Walter, Grant is also the person I've been in contact with about the controlling stake." The dining room around us, the soft clatter of plates, the murmur of other conversations felt very far away. "Does Ryan know you're involved?" I asked. "No. Grant's kept the investor discussions completely separate from the partnership talks." "And does he know Ryan is my son?" "Not yet." I exhaled slowly through my nose. Ryan was at the same table I was approaching, chasing the same company, with numbers that weren't real, and a deposit on a house that hadn't been paid for yet. "Ethan," I said, "tell me everything Grant told you about what he's looking for in a strategic partner." And Ethan did for the next 40 minutes, leaning over the table, speaking quietly, the way he's spoken to me in serious moments for 30 years. By the time we finished, I had the shape of what I needed to do. Not a plan, exactly. More like the outline of one, the way a building exists in blueprints before a single piece of concrete is poured. That evening, back at the house, I walked past Ryan's office and heard him inside on the phone, his voice bright and elevated, the voice of a man telling a story that's going well. "The Hartwell thing is basically done," he was saying. "Grant liked what we brought to the table. Claire, we're talking about a different life here. This is the deal that changes everything." Through the door, I heard Claire's voice respond, something delighted, rising in pitch, the sound of a woman picturing rooms in a house she'd already put money down on. My hand ached. I looked down and found I'd been pressing it flat against the wall of the hallway so hard the paint had left a faint impression on my palm. I pulled my hand away, straightened my shirt, and walked back to the room by the garage where Ethan's number was already on my phone screen waiting. I pressed call. "Set up the meeting with Grant," I said when he answered. "As soon as possible. And Ethan, make sure he understands he's meeting someone who built their career in this industry. Someone who knows exactly what Hartwell needs." "He'll understand," Ethan said. "Good," I said. "Because my son is about to walk into that room thinking he's already won. And I need Grant to know the difference between a proposal built on real numbers and one built on hope." I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed in the room by the garage. And for the first time since I'd arrived in this house, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like a man who had been patient long enough. The last week of October had a particular kind of pressure to it. The kind you feel in the air before a storm, when everything goes too still and the light turns the wrong color, and your body knows something is coming before your mind catches up. Ryan knocked on my door on a Wednesday morning, without the leather folder this time, without the coffee, without any of the warm packaging he'd used the first time around. He stood in the doorway in his dress shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, phone in his left hand, and looked at me with an expression I recognized from his teenage years, the one that meant he'd run out of patience and was working hard not to show it. "Dad." He stepped into the room, pulled the desk chair out, and sat down like a man taking a position rather than having a conversation. "I need the paperwork done by Friday. The bank has a hard deadline, November 1st. After that, the loan structure falls apart completely." I was sitting on the edge of the bed with my coffee, And I looked at him over the rim of the mug, with the particular calm of a man who has been expecting this conversation for 2 weeks. "I'm still waiting on Diane to finish her review," I said. Ryan's jaw tightened visibly. A muscle jumped along the side of his face. "Dad, it's been over 2 weeks. How long does a standard document take?" "As long as it needs to, Ryan." He leaned forward, hands on his knees, and his voice dropped to the register he uses when he wants something to sound like reason instead of pressure. "Look, I'm not trying to make this complicated. This is a straightforward legal structure that protects your assets. My attorney has done 100 of these. Diane is going to tell you the exact same thing. Then it shouldn't be hard to wait for her to say so." He stood up. The chair scraped back harder than necessary. He picked up his phone from the desk, turned it over once in his hand, the specific gesture of a man deciding how much of what he's feeling he's going to let show. And then he looked at me. "Friday, Dad," he said. "That's all I'm asking." He walked out, and I listened to his footsteps go down the hall with that same clipped precision I'd been cataloging for weeks, and then the office door closed and the house went tight and quiet. That same afternoon, Ethan called. "Walter, Marcus Webb reached out to his account manager at Ryan's company this morning. He's thinking about pulling the contract when it comes up for renewal next month. Apparently, the service has slipped response times, delivery windows, a couple of missed commitments. His words were, 'I've been patient, but I'm running a business, not a charity.'" I sat with that for a moment. Marcus Webb's contract was Ryan's largest single account, over $4 million annually, the kind of revenue that anchors a company's entire financial story. Losing it right now with the Hartwell negotiations live and the bank deadline already in trouble would be devastating. "Call Marcus," I said. Ethan paused. "Walter, call him Ethan. Tell him I'd consider it a personal favor if he gave the company 1 more quarter to get the service levels back where they should be. You know Ryan is going to think he turned it around himself." "I know exactly what Ryan is going to think," I said, and my voice came out flat and tired in a way that surprised even me. "Make the call." Ethan made the call. Marcus, who had known me for 30 years and understood the language of personal favors between people who'd built their careers together, agreed to hold the contract through the end of Q1. That evening, I was passing Ryan's office when his door swung open, and he nearly walked into me, his face electric, with the kind of energy that only comes from news that feels like vindication. "Dad, Marcus Webb just confirmed the renewal." He was grinning, running one hand through his hair, the boyish gesture he's had since he was 12. I knew that account was solid. That's what real relationship management looks like. You build trust, you deliver, and when things get rocky, your clients stick with you. From the kitchen, Claire's voice floated through. "That's amazing, babe. See, you don't need anyone handing you anything." "Never did," Ryan said, and pointed at me like I was supposed to agree. "Congratulations," I said. And I meant it in the specific, painful way you mean it when someone is celebrating something they don't fully understand. November 1st came. It went. I did not sign the paperwork. That evening, I sat on the edge of the bed in the room by the garage and listened to Ryan on the phone with his bank. His voice low and strained, working through explanations I couldn't fully make out, but didn't need to. The tone was enough. The tone of a man explaining to someone with authority why a thing that was supposed to happen hadn't happened, and trying to make that sound like a delay rather than a collapse. I opened my notebook to the Hartwell page. The numbers were still there exactly as I'd left them, waiting patiently for the moment they would matter. That moment, I understood, was getting close. On the evening of November 7th, Ryan had 8 people over for dinner. He told me about it that morning, breezy almost as an afterthought. The way you mention something you've already decided doesn't require a conversation. "Business associates tonight, Dad," Claire's doing the whole thing. It'll probably run late. You don't have to come down." "I appreciate the heads up," I said. He nodded and moved on already somewhere else in his head, and I spent the day in my room reading and thinking and listening to Claire move through the house with the particular focused energy of a woman preparing a stage. By 7 o'clock, cars were in the driveway and voices were filling the downstairs. I could hear Ryan in host mode, that big, easy laugh bouncing off the dining room walls, the sound of a man who is entirely in his element when he has an audience. I went to bed early, or tried to. Around 9, my throat went dry the way it does when you haven't had enough water during the day, and I got up, pulled on my slippers, and padded down the hall toward the kitchen. I wasn't thinking about the dinner. I was thinking about a glass of water and getting back to sleep. The kitchen was at the end of a short corridor that opened onto the dining room on one side. I came around the corner and reached for the kitchen doorway, just as one of Ryan's guests, a heavy-set man in a blazer, holding a glass of red wine, glanced over and caught my eye. "Ryan?" the man said, with the easy curiosity of someone making dinner conversation. "Is this your father?" Ryan turned from the head of the table. The expression that crossed his face lasted less than a second, a flicker of something between irritation and calculation before the social mask came back down smooth and practiced. "Yeah," he said, in the offhand tone of a man addressing something mildly inconvenient. "He's been staying with us." He lifted his wine glass slightly, the gesture of a man wrapping something up. "House repairs. You know how it is." And then, dropping his voice just slightly, not enough, nowhere near enough, he added, "Honestly, he's more of a burden than anything else right now. We're just waiting for his situation to get sorted." A ripple of polite laughter moved around the table. Nobody looked at me. Or they did. And then they looked somewhere else with the speed of people who have just witnessed something they'd rather pretend they hadn't. I was standing in the kitchen doorway with my hand on the frame. I want to tell you that something dramatic happened inside me in that moment. Some great wave of anger, some volcanic feeling that rose up and demanded an outlet. But that's not what happened. What happened was quieter, and in some ways worse. My hand dropped from the doorframe. My chest didn't tighten. It hollowed out the way a room feels when you walk in and realize everyone you were expecting to find there is gone. I felt something break open behind my sternum, slow and irrevocable, the way old wood gives way, not with a crack, but with a long, low groan. A burden. My son had just described me to a room full of strangers as a burden. I turned around and walked back down the hall. I did not hurry. I kept my footsteps even and measured the way I learned to keep them during 40 years of boardrooms and hard conversations and moments when falling apart was not an option. I went to the room by the garage, closed the door behind me with a soft, deliberate click, and sat down on the edge of the bed. I reached for Margaret's photo on the dresser and held it in both hands. He said it out loud. I told her. My voice came out rougher than I expected. In front of 8 people, like it was nothing. I pressed my thumb against the corner of the glass, like I was nothing. I sat there with her photo until my breathing steadied. Then I stood up, pulled my duffel bag from the chair, and began to pack. Not frantically, deliberately, the way you pack when you've already made the decision, and the only thing left is the execution. Each shirt folded once, socks tucked together, the notebook with its columns of numbers, the source code binder, the floppy disk. Last of all, Margaret's photo wrapped in the same flannel shirt it had traveled here in. I was zipping the bag when Claire knocked. She opened the door before I answered, just a few inches, just enough to deliver the message with the minimum of personal involvement. "Walter." Her voice was soft, calibrated, the voice of someone who has rehearsed this. I think it would be better for everyone if you found somewhere else for tonight. I've already called a taxi. It should be here in about 10 minutes. She glanced at the bag on the bed. I can see you're already ahead of me. I am, I said. She nodded once, not unkindly, not cruelly, just efficiently, and pulled the door closed. I picked up the bag. I picked up Margaret. I walked out of the room by the garage for the last time down the side hallway, through the entryway, and out the front door, without passing through the dining room. I could hear Ryan's voice carrying from the other side of the wall, still talking, still performing, still that big, bright laugh that had once been the realest sound in the world to me. The night air hit my face cold and clean, and I stood on the front step and breathed it in. The taxi was already at the curb. I climbed in, set the bag on the seat beside me, and held Margaret's photo in my lap with both hands. "Where to?" the driver asked. I gave him the name of the hotel downtown. He pulled away from the curb, and I watched the house recede in the side mirror. The warm light in the dining room windows, the silhouette of people moving behind glass, and I felt something unexpected and quiet move through me underneath all the grief and the tiredness and the long ache of the evening. Relief. Clean and unmistakable as cold air. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. Ethan's name on the screen, a message sent at 8:47, before any of tonight had happened, in the time before the table and the wine glass and the word burden had made it into the world. Michael Grant confirmed. He can meet Thursday. Walter, this is it. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face up on the seat beside me and looked out the window at the city moving past. Thursday was 6 days away, and for the first time in a very long time I could not wait. The hotel room was quiet, in the way that only hotel rooms can be, that particular silence that belongs to no one. And because it belongs to no one, belongs entirely to you. I set my duffel bag down beside the bed, took off my jacket and sat in the chair by the window without turning on the lights. Outside, Seattle stretched out in its nighttime geometry, the Space Needle lit against the low clouds, the waterfront glittering cold and steady, the city going about its business with the complete indifference of something too large to notice one man sitting in a dark room 6 floors up. I set Margaret's photo on the windowsill, where I could see it against the light. "Well," I said to her, "that's done." I didn't mean it bitterly. I meant it the way you mean it when a thing you've been dreading finally arrives and turns out to be survivable when the waiting was worse than the event. The word burden still sat in my chest like something with weight. But around it, underneath it, I could feel something else, the specific relief of a man who no longer has to pretend he doesn't know what he knows. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Ryan, all within 20 minutes of the taxi pulling away from the curb. No voicemails. I set the phone face up on the nightstand and did not call back. I sat at that window until nearly 1 in the morning, thinking not about Ryan, and not about the paperwork, and not even about Ethan's message, which was still glowing on my screen. I thought about Margaret, about the year she got sick, and what it had taught me about the difference between the things that matter and the things that only feel like they do. About the camping trip in the Cascades, Ryan at 8 years old, the way he used to reach for my hand, crossing a stream because he didn't want to admit he was afraid of the current. "I don't know where I went wrong," I told her quietly, the city lights moving soft on the glass between us. "Or maybe I went right and he just chose differently." My throat tightened. I pressed 2 fingers against the corner of her photo frame. But I'm not going to let him take everything down with him. I can't. Her expression didn't change. It never did. But I've spent 40 years learning to read what she was saying anyway, and what she was saying was, "Then do something about it, Walter. Stop sitting in the dark talking to a photograph." I almost laughed. Almost. I went to bed and slept better than I had in 3 weeks. Ethan was in the hotel lobby at 8 the next morning, sitting in one of the low leather chairs near the entrance with a coffee in each hand and a briefcase that looked like it had not been opened yet because he'd been waiting for me to open it together. He stood when he saw me come out of the elevator. He looked me over the way he's been looking me over for 30 years, quickly, thoroughly cataloging, and then he held out one of the coffees. "You look like yourself again," he said. "I feel like myself again," I said, and meant it in a way that surprised me with its fullness. We took a corner table in the hotel restaurant, away from the morning crowd of business travelers and families checking out. Ethan opened the briefcase. Hartwell Group had been built over 4 decades into one of the most quietly powerful logistics operations in the western United States. 23 states, federal contracts, a proprietary regional distribution network that would cost 3 times its current value to replicate from scratch. The founding CEO had retired 18 months ago after a health scare, and the board had brought in Michael Grant to modernize the company's structure and find the right long-term capital partner. "The controlling stake is 34%, Ethan said, spreading documents across the table. "In this case, controlling is the right word. The remaining shares are distributed across 11 separate minority holders, none of whom have more than 8%. Whoever holds 34% effectively steers the ship. And Grant wants a partner, not just capital. He's been very clear about that. He's turned down 2 private equity approaches in the last year because they wanted to extract value. He wants someone who understands what they're buying, the history, the operations, the people." Ethan looked at me over his reading glasses. Walter the man spent 6 years in his 20s managing a regional freight depot. He came up through operations. He's not going to be impressed by someone who just has money. Something settled into my chest, steady and certain, like a key turning in a lock that's been waiting to be opened. "Set up Thursday," I said. "And Ethan, don't use my name in advance. Just tell him you're bringing a strategic investor with significant industry history who prefers to let the conversation speak for itself." Ethan's eyebrow went up a fraction. "And the connection to Ryan. Grant doesn't know Ryan is my son. Not yet. Keep it that way. Until the day of signing, my identity stays private. That's a condition of my involvement, non-negotiable." Ethan studied me for a moment, the way he does when he's decided something, but wants to make sure I've thought it through all the way. "Grant's going to figure it out eventually." "Eventually is fine," I said. "December 5th is fine. November 13th is not." He nodded once, closed the briefcase with a soft click, and picked up his coffee. "There's one more thing," he said carefully. "Ryan's company submitted a formal partnership proposal to Hartwell last week. He's scheduled to present directly to Grant on December 3rd. The coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. 2 days before my signing date. "He's going to walk into that building on December 3rd thinking he's about to close the biggest deal of his career," I said. "Yes." I set the cup down. My jaw was set. My hands were steady. Behind my sternum, something fierce and quiet burned with the particular heat of a man who has made his decision completely and does not intend to revisit it. "Good," I said. "Then Thursday, Ethan. Let's not waste any more time." Back in my room, I looked at the 3 missed calls from Ryan still sitting on my phone screen. Still no voicemail. I thought about calling back. I held the phone in my hand for a long moment, thumb hovering. Then I set it face down on the nightstand and went to get ready for Thursday. I wore the suit I'd worn to Margaret's funeral. It still fit. That surprised me a little, and then didn't Margaret would have said that grief keeps a man trim. I stood at the hotel mirror buttoning the jacket and thought about the last time I'd worn it, standing at the front of a church in Portland in the January cold, holding myself together with both hands, while the pastor said the things pastors say. 6 years ago. It felt like another lifetime, and also like last Tuesday. "All right, Margaret," I said to my reflection. "Let's go see what we're worth." Ethan was waiting in the lobby at 8:45, already dressed, already sharp. We rode the elevator up to the 22nd floor of the Hartwell Group building in the kind of companionable quiet that only exists between people who have known each other long enough that silence is its own conversation. When the doors opened, Ethan straightened his jacket and looked at me. "Ready? Been ready for 30 years, I said. Michael Grant met us at the entrance to the conference room, a trim man in his early 50s with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of direct handshake that tells you in 3 seconds whether someone is performing confidence or actually has it. Grant had it. He gripped my hand, held it a beat longer than perfunctory, and looked at me with the particular attention of someone who has learned to read people fast. "Mr. Hayes," he said. "Michael Grant. Thank you for making the trip." "Walter," I said, and the trip was worth making. The conference room was clean and functional, a long table, 8 chairs, a wall of windows looking out over Puget Sound. No artwork trying to impress anyone. I liked that about it immediately. Grant started by talking about Hartwell, not the pitch version, not the investor deck version, but the real version. The way the founding CEO had built the regional network hub by hub over 40 years, the federal contracts that formed the spine of the operation, the modernization initiatives Grant had pushed through in the last 18 months, and the specific gap he was trying to fill with the right capital partner. "I've had conversations with 2 private equity groups this year," Grant said, leaning back in his chair, with his arms crossed, in the comfortable way of a man who is entirely at ease with his own position. Both times I walked away. "You know why? They wanted to sell it back in pieces," I said. He pointed at me. "They wanted to extract. I don't want someone who sees this company as a vehicle. I want someone who understands what it does and why that matters." He paused. "Ethan tells me you have deep roots in logistics operations." "I built a software company in the late 80s, I said. "Routing and inventory management systems for freight and warehouse operations. We sold in 2003. Grant's expression shifted just slightly, just enough. "What was the company?" "Hayes Logistics Systems." A beat of recognition moved across his face, immediate and genuine. "Hayes Software." He sat forward, elbows on the table. "We implemented your routing system across our Pacific Northwest hubs in 1997. It was the most significant operational upgrade we'd made in a decade." He studied me with new intensity, the way a man looks at something when he's realizing it's considerably more than what he thought it was. "You built that system." "Wrote the first version at a kitchen table in a rented apartment," I said. "Took about 9 months and a lot of cold coffee." Something warmed in Grant's expression, the warmth of a man recognizing a peer, which is different from and rarer than the warmth of a man recognizing a superior. He leaned back again, but differently this time. More open. We talked for 2.5 hours. So, not about terms, not yet about the industry, about where freight and distribution were heading in the next decade, about the specific operational challenges Hartwell faced in its western mountain corridors, about technology adoption timelines in companies with legacy infrastructure. Grant asked good questions. I mean genuinely good, the kind that can only come from someone who has spent real time in operations and knows which details matter. My voice caught just once when Grant mentioned the routing optimization work his team had done based on principles in my original patent filing. I covered it with a sip of water and kept going. But I felt it, a complicated heat behind my eyes, the particular emotion of hearing that something you built quietly in a rented apartment has been making the world work better for 30 years without ever needing you to know about it. When we got to structure, I laid out the terms clearly and without theater. The 34% controlling stake, the consortium I was leading, the board role I intended to take. And then one condition. Grant raised an eyebrow. My identity as lead investor stays private until the day of signing. No announcement, no industry whispers, nothing external until December 5th. Grant studied me. That's unusual. I know. Is there a legal concern I should be aware of? None, I said. It's a personal matter, unrelated to the transaction itself. I simply need the timing to be what it is. He looked at Ethan, who gave the small, precise nod of a man vouching for someone he has trusted for 3 decades. Grant looked back at me. All right, he said. December 5th. And Walter. He extended his hand across the table, and when I took it this time, it felt different from the handshake at the door. It felt like something being decided. I think you're exactly what this company needs at the table. I think so too, I said. In the elevator going down, Ethan exhaled like a man releasing something he'd been holding for a while. That's done, he said. Not yet, I said. December 5th. That evening, Ethan called me in the hotel room. I was sitting by the window again, the same chair, the same view, Margaret's photo on the sill. But the room felt different tonight. Less like a place of exile and more like a place of preparation. Ryan's presentation to Grant is confirmed for December 3rd, Ethan said. 2 days before your signing. Grant has kept the investor discussions and the partnership talks in completely separate channels, standard practice for a company in active acquisition talks. Neither side knows the other is in the building. I looked out at the city, the Space Needle, the cold lights on the water. My son somewhere out there in this same city preparing a proposal built on numbers that weren't real for a company that was already deciding to go in a different direction. Good, I said. My voice came out quiet, and even the way it does when something has been decided so completely, there's nothing left to feel about it except clarity. Walter. Ethan's voice was careful. Are you sure? I looked at Margaret's photo. At the woman who had known always exactly what I was made of, even in the years when I'd forgotten myself. I've never been more sure of anything, I said, since the day I married her. Ethan didn't respond to that. He didn't need to. After I hung up, I opened my notebook to the Hartwell page and wrote one line at the bottom beneath all the numbers, December 5th. Then I closed it, turned off the light, and slept the deep, uncomplicated sleep of a man who knows exactly what comes next. I was not in that room on December 3rd. I want to be clear about that, because what I'm about to tell you, I know the way you know things that happened while you were somewhere else from the person who was there from documents. I eventually read, and from Ryan himself, months later in a conversation, neither of us planned, and neither of us walked away from unchanged. I've put it together as honestly as I can, and I'm telling it to you now because without it, what happened 2 days later won't carry the weight it needs to carry. I spent December 3rd in my hotel room. I drank 2 cups of coffee. I read 40 pages of a novel I've since forgotten entirely. I walked to the window approximately 11 times and looked at the Hartwell Group building 6 blocks away, glass and steel, catching the thin December light, the 22nd floor invisible from the street, but not from my mind. I thought about Ryan pulling into that parking garage. I thought about him riding the elevator up, checking his reflection in the steel doors, squaring his shoulders. I knew that gesture. I'd watched him do it before baseball games when he was 14, before job interviews when he was 22. My son getting ready to perform. I thought about Margaret too, about how she used to say that the hardest part of being a parent isn't the moments when your children fail, it's the moments when they succeed at the wrong thing. At 9:15 that morning, Ryan walked into a conference room 6 blocks away, and gave the presentation of his professional life. I know this because Ethan called me that evening. He'd been in the room not as anyone Ryan would have recognized, just as the independent financial observer listed in the meeting. Documentation, the kind of quiet background presence that large deals always include, and that nobody looks at twice. When Ethan walked into a room, he had the particular gift of becoming part of the furniture. 30 years of negotiation will do that to a man. He called at 6:47. I was sitting in the chair by the window when the phone rang. Margaret's photo on the sill between me and the city. The early December dark already settled over Seattle. "Tell me," I said when I picked up. Ethan exhaled. He was good, Walter. His voice had the specific quality it gets when he's choosing words with surgical care. "I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else. He was genuinely impressively good. The presentation was polished, clean, deck-strong narrative arc, confident delivery. He read the room well, adjusted his pacing. When Grant leaned in with questions, didn't oversell when he sensed skepticism. If you'd walked in off the street and watched that 45 minutes, you would have been proud of him. Something ached so deeply in my chest that I had to press my fist against my sternum for a moment. Hard just to have something solid to push against. But the numbers weren't real, I said. No. Ethan's voice flattened. Our due diligence team confirmed it 3 weeks ago and re-verified last week. The due diligence findings were exactly what we'd confirmed 3 weeks earlier. The numbers Ryan put on those slides didn't match the numbers in the audit file sitting on Grant's desk upstairs. Every projection downstream was built on a foundation that wasn't there. The company Ryan presented to that room doesn't exist. The company that actually exists is smaller, more leveraged, and considerably more fragile. I closed my eyes. Outside the window, a siren moved through the wet streets below, rising and fading. Grant knows all of this, Ethan continued. He's known since our preliminary report 3 weeks ago. He sat through Ryan's entire presentation, fully aware that the numbers on the screen didn't match the numbers in the audit file sitting on his desk upstairs. And he said nothing. Not one word. Asked good questions, sharp ones, the kind that an honest company would have been able to answer comfortably. Nodded in the right places. When Ryan finished, Grant stood up, shook his hand, said he appreciated the thoroughness of the proposal and would be in touch. A pause. Ryan thanked him, said he was looking forward to the next conversation. Walked out with his team looking like a man who has just decided what to do with his bonus. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth. My eyes were burning, and I let them burn because there was no one in the hotel room to see it. And sometimes a man needs to feel what he's feeling without having to manage it for anyone else. What did he say? I asked. My voice came out rougher than I intended. In the hallway. After. Ethan was quiet for just a moment. He told his assistant the meeting went well, that Grant liked them, that he could feel it in the room. Another pause, careful and deliberate. He sounded like a man who was already picking out furniture. The rain had started on the window again, a soft, persistent Seattle rain that turned the city lights into smears of color on the glass. Ethan, I said. Why did Grant let him finish? Why sit through 45 minutes knowing what he knew? I asked him the same question. Something close to admiration moved through Ethan's voice. Grant said I wanted to see who he was when he believed he was winning. He said a man's character is easiest to read when he thinks no one is watching. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. I thought about Ryan at 9 years old playing Little League, the way he'd look back at the dugout every time he did something good to make sure I'd seen it. Always performing, always needing the audience to complete the moment. I'd thought it was confidence then. Now I wondered if I'd been watching something else entirely and calling it by the wrong name. I set the phone on the nightstand and sat in the chair with Margaret until the rain picked up and the city went soft behind the water on the glass. He was good in that room, I told her. Ethan said so. He has everything he needs to be exactly who I hoped he'd become. My throat tightened around the next words, and I had to push through them. He just made choices I can't undo for him. And tomorrow I'm going to have to stand in a room and be the person who shows him what those choices cost. Her photo said nothing. Her photo never said anything. But I've spent 40 years learning to hear her anyway, and what I heard was, "You didn't come this far to flinch at the finish line, Walter." No, I agreed. I didn't. At 9 the following morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I looked at the screen without picking it up. Ryan's name. A text message. "Dad, we should talk. I know things have been rough between us lately. I've been thinking about it a lot. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow morning?" I think it would be good. Tomorrow morning was December 5th. I picked up the phone. Read it a second time slowly, the way you read something when you want to make sure you're not misunderstanding the tone. The message was genuine, or at least it was the closest Ryan comes to genuine when he doesn't yet know what he's asking for. I typed back 4 words, "I'll be busy tomorrow." Sent it before I could think about it longer than I needed to. I set the phone face down on the nightstand, picked up the notebook from the bedside table, and opened it to the last page I'd written on. December 5th in my handwriting circled twice. I looked at it for a moment. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and lay back in the dark with my hands folded on my chest, and the rain against the window and Margaret's photo, a dim shape on the sill. I had somewhere to be in the morning. I had somewhere to be, and I intended to be there early, and everything that came after that was going to be exactly what it needed to be. For the first time in a long time, I slept without dreaming. I arrived at Hartwell Group at 8:45. 15 minutes early, the way my father taught me, the way I'd been teaching myself ever since, the way I intended to go on, until they put me in the ground. The receptionist on the 22nd floor recognized me from my previous visit and smiled with genuine warmth. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Grant is already in the conference room." "Of course he is," I said. "Thank you." The conference room was set up differently from the first meeting. More chairs, a longer document arrangement on the table, the quiet infrastructure of something being formally concluded. Ethan was already there, standing by the windows with his coffee, and when he saw me, he straightened, with the particular relief of a man who has been holding his breath and can finally stop. "Ready," he said. "Let's finish this," I said. Michael Grant came in 2 minutes later with his legal team, 3 attorneys, 2 of whom were carrying document folders with the kind of quiet efficiency that means they've done this many times. We shook hands around the table, found our seats, and began the work of making official what had been decided 3 weeks earlier on a Thursday morning over lukewarm coffee and a set of documents that told the truth about a 40-year-old company. I sat at the head of the table on the left side. Lead investor. That was my seat, and I sat in it the way I'd sat in every seat that mattered in my life, without performance, without theater, with nothing but the steady intention of a man who knows why he's in the room. At 9:05, the conference room door opened. Ryan walked in. He was dressed sharply, a charcoal suit I hadn't seen before, a tie that probably cost more than my first month's rent in that apartment where I'd written the Hayes software code by hand. He walked the way he always walks when he's confident, with that forward lean that says I own the next 5 minutes, and he was already scanning the room for Grant, already calculating, already 3 moves ahead in whatever game he thought he was playing. He found Grant, nodded at him, started to reach for a handshake, and then his eyes moved the way eyes do when they're doing a quick sweep of unfamiliar faces past Ethan, past the attorneys, past the documents on the table, and landed on the man sitting at the head of the table on the left. Ryan Hayes stopped moving. Not slowed. Stopped. His hand was still extended toward Grant, still midway through a gesture that had nowhere left to go, and his face went through something I can only describe as a controlled collapse. Every layer of the confident CEO presentation, dropping away at once, leaving underneath it the face of a man who has just understood that the ground he was standing on is not the ground he thought it was. His leather folder slipped from his other hand. It hit the floor with a flat crack that no one in the room pretended not to hear. I looked at my son across the conference table. My heart was beating steadily and slowly, not with triumph, not with anger, but with the particular gravity of a moment that has been a long time coming and cannot be taken back once it arrives. "Sit down, Ryan," I said. My voice came out quiet. Even. The voice I use when something is serious enough that volume would only cheapen it. Ryan's mouth opened. His lips formed the beginning of a word, "Dad," but what came out was nothing more than a breath, a shape with no sound behind it. He bent and picked up the folder from the floor, slowly, like a man moving through water, and found his chair on the opposite side of the table with the careful movements of someone who is not entirely sure his legs are going to hold. Grant cleared his throat. "Ryan, thank you for coming on short notice. I believe you know our lead strategic investor." "Walter Hayes," I said for the benefit of the room. "I've been leading the consortium acquiring the controlling interest in Hartwell Group. Effective today." Ryan's eyes didn't leave my face. I could see him processing, running through the architecture of the last 3 months, the last 3 years, the last decade, trying to find the seam where this had started and where he'd missed it. The signing took 40 minutes. I signed each page in the same steady hand I've used to sign 40 years of contracts, unhurried, deliberate, the way you sign something when you mean every word of it. Ryan watched. When Grant and his legal team stepped out to make copies, Ethan quietly excused himself to take a call, and for the first time since Ryan had walked through that door, it was just the two of us in the room. Ryan's voice, when it finally came, was stripped of every layer of the CEO. It was just a voice, raw and young and cracked at the edges. "How much?" he said. "How much do you actually have?" I reached into the folder in front of me and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a summary page, clean, factual, the kind of document Ethan produces when he wants something to be understood without any possibility of misinterpretation. The first line, annual income $680,000. The second line, total liquid and investment assets. I watched Ryan's eyes move down the page. I watched the color leave his face, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, the way light leaves a room when the sun goes behind a cloud and doesn't come back. His jaw worked once. His hand, flat on the table, trembled at the fingertips. "Dad." His voice broke on the word. Just broke clean through like a branch that's held as long as it can. How long have you?" "Long enough," I said. "Ryan, there's something else we need to discuss." I kept my voice level, kept my eyes on his face. "Your company's financial statements. The ones you submitted in your partnership proposal to Hartwell." The trembling in his fingertips stopped. His whole hand went still, instead the way things go, still just before they fall. "The Q2 and Q3 figures," I said. "The debt reclassification. Hartwell's due diligence team found the discrepancies 3 weeks ago." Ryan's face went the color of old paper. He pressed his lips together so hard they went white. "I was going to fix it," he said. His voice barely made it across the table. "After the deal closed, I was going to fix all of it." "I know," I said, and the grief in my chest was so heavy and so old that my voice came out almost gentle. "That's what people tell themselves, son. But that's not how it works." I reached for the document on my left, the one I'd asked Grant's team to prepare, the one formalizing what the board had already agreed to. I set it on the table in front of Ryan and let him read the heading himself. His throat moved. His eyes dropped to the page. Effective immediately, I said. What happened next didn't unfold in a single conversation or a single day. It came apart the way things built on bad foundations always come apart, not in one dramatic collapse, but in a series of smaller ones, each one revealing the next, each one worse than the last. I'll tell it to you the way it happened because you've earned the full picture by now. On the afternoon of December 5th, after Grant's legal team had filed the paperwork and Ethan had gone to make calls, and Ryan and I were left alone in that conference room for the second time, I told him what was going to happen to his company. The board has reviewed the due diligence findings, I said, when Hartwell's team audited your company as part of the partnership evaluation. The financial misrepresentations triggered a clause in the preliminary agreement, one that gave the board authority to require immediate leadership remediation as a condition of any further dealings. The CFO will serve in an interim capacity while a full operational review is completed. Effective immediately, you're removed as CEO. Ryan's head came up. His eyes were red at the rims he'd been holding himself together by sheer will for the last hour, and I could see the effort it was costing him in the set of his jaw and the rigid line of his shoulders. Dad, his voice cracked down the middle. I built that company. 14 years. You can't just... You built it on numbers that weren't true, Ryan. My voice stayed level, but my chest ached with every word. That's not something I did to you. That's something you chose. He pressed both hands flat on the conference table. Fingers spread wide and breathed through his nose, the gesture of a man trying desperately not to lose his composure in a room where losing it would cost him the last shred of dignity he had left. What happens now? He managed. Now you find out what's actually there, I said. 3 days later, on December 8th, Ryan sat across from his bank's loan officer and learned that the 3 separate loans he'd taken against his company's equity loans he'd been servicing carefully. Loans he'd thought of as leverage rather than liability had consumed virtually everything. When the bank completed its reconciliation against the actual asset values, not the inflated ones, Ryan walked out of that meeting with less than he'd had when he started his company 14 years ago. I know because he called me that evening. Not to complain, not to argue, just to say in a voice scraped hollow by a day that had taken everything, Dad, the bank meeting was today. I know, I said, a long exhale on the other end of the line. Claire's deposit on the house, the $85,000. It's gone too. Non-refundable. I closed my eyes. I know that too, Ryan. He didn't say anything for a moment, and I could hear it. That silence, the sound of a man standing at the bottom of a hole. He dug himself, and finally understanding how far down he is. She's not taking it well, he said finally. No, I said. I wouldn't expect she would. By December 10th, Claire had stopped taking it quietly. She sat Ryan down at the kitchen table in the house he was already behind on, and told him with the precise clarity of a woman who has decided exactly what she wants and what she's willing to do to get it, that he needed to call his father, that he needed to apologize, that he needed to do whatever it took. Ryan called me on December 12th. His voice when I picked up was nothing like the CEO voice, nothing like the dinner party host voice, nothing like any version of my son I'd heard in years. It was just Ryan, 40 years old, sitting alone with the particular exhaustion of a man who has run out of performances. Dad? A long pause. I don't know how to start this. Then start anywhere, I said. I'm sorry. The words came out rough and unpolished and real. About the room by the garage. About the Facebook post. About the box of Mom's things that Claire... His voice broke there sharp and sudden, and he had to stop and swallow hard before he could keep going. About everything I said at that dinner, in front of those people. Another ragged breath. I'm sorry, Dad. I sat with that for a moment. Let it be what it was. Claire wants me to ask about the inheritance, he said. I know that. I'm not calling about that. I know the difference, Ryan, I said. Come see me. Thursday. Alone. He came. He showed up at the hotel on December 15th in a flannel shirt and jeans, looking like he'd lost 10 pounds and about 3 years of certainty. He sat across from me at the small table by the window and wrapped both hands around a coffee mug like he needed something solid to hold on to. I let him talk first. He talked for 20 minutes about the bank, about Claire, about the company, about the things he'd done, and the reasons he'd told himself at the time were good enough. He didn't try to justify any of it. He just laid it out the way you lay something down when you're done carrying it. When he finished, I took a breath. Marcus Webb, I said. 2010. You thought you won that account on your own. Ryan's brow furrowed. I did win it. Cold call. I went in there and I called Marcus 3 weeks before your meeting, I said. I told him you were sharp and hungry and asked him to give you a chance. He said yes because we'd been friends for 16 years. The color shifted in Ryan's face. His grip tightened on the mug. Dennis Hartfield, 2012. You were 3 months from shutting the doors. I know. I landed the Hartfield contract and turned it. Ethan called Dennis. I asked him to. My voice was steady, but my chest hurt with every sentence, not regret, not guilt, just the weight of truth when it finally has to be spoken out loud. Dennis gave you that contract because of me, not because of your pitch. Ryan set the mug down. His hands were trembling now, fine, barely visible, but there. Sandra Mitchell, 2014. Ethan made that introduction. You thought it was a cold call that worked. Dad, his voice came out wrecked. Why didn't you just tell me? Because I wanted you to believe you could do it, I said. I just didn't want you to fail before you got the chance to find out. I leaned forward slightly. 3 contracts, Ryan. 2 loan guarantees I co-signed through a third party so you'd never see my name. 1 client I saved last month when you thought it was your relationship skills. I held his gaze. You never built it alone. You just never felt the hand. Ryan's eyes went wet. He pressed his lips together hard, fighting at jaw, trembling with the effort of staying composed. 1 tear escaped anyway, just one, and he wiped it away fast with the back of his hand, like he was angry at it for being there. On December 19th, I sat in Diane Whitmore's office and signed a revised estate document. The full value of my assets would pass into a trust administered independently for the benefit of Ryan's children from his earlier relationship, who were 9 and 11 years old and had done nothing wrong. Diane looked at me over her reading glasses. Ryan and Claire get nothing directly. Ryan gets a chance to earn something, I said. That's more than most people get twice. That evening, 2 text messages came in sequence from Ryan's number. The first, Claire is leaving. She moved out this morning. A minute passed. The second, Dad, can I still come work for you? I stood at the hotel window with the phone in my hand and the December dark pressing against the glass, and I typed back the answer slowly, 1 word at a time. January in Seattle is the most honest month of the year. No holiday lights left to soften the edges, no autumn color to distract the eye. Just gray sky and cold air, and the city stripped down to what it actually is, functional, unglamorous, getting on with it. I've always respected January for exactly that reason. I arrived at the Hartwell Group building at 8:45 on the morning of January 5th, 2026. I stopped at the coffee cart on the corner outside the small one run by a man named Pete, who remembered my order after 2 visits and always had it ready, and rode the elevator up to the 22nd floor, with my coffee in one hand and my briefcase in the other. The same briefcase I'd carried for 20 years, the leather worn soft at the corners from decades of conference tables and early mornings. The floor was already alive when I stepped off the particular productive hum of people settling into their day. Monitors glowing, phones beginning their morning rhythm, the smell of fresh coffee and the low murmur of people who know what they're doing and are getting on with it. I came around the corner into the main workspace, and there was Ryan. He was sitting at a workstation in the open bullpen, no private office, no corner window, no nameplate with a title on it. Just a desk in the middle of the room like everyone else's, a monitor, a keyboard, a headset hung on the side of the screen. He was already working or trying to. I could see his eyes moving across whatever was on the screen, his brow slightly furrowed with the concentration of someone doing unfamiliar work carefully. He looked thinner than he had in September. He looked like a man who had been sleeping in a quiet house and not sleeping well in it. He was wearing a plain blue Oxford shirt, no jacket, the kind of shirt you wear when you've stopped thinking about what impression you're making and started thinking about what you need to get done. I was almost past the edge of the bullpen when he looked up. Our eyes met across 15 feet of open office floor, and something moved across my son's face that I hadn't seen there in longer than I could accurately name. Not the CEO smile, not the dinner party warmth, not the performance of a man managing his audience. Just Ryan, looking at his father. He stood up. Not because anyone told him to. Not because there was a protocol that required it. He just stood the way a person stands when someone walks into a room and deserves to be acknowledged by the act of rising. I walked over. I set my coffee down on the edge of his desk and looked at him, at the tiredness in his face, at the something new underneath the tiredness that looked almost like clarity, and I put my hand on his shoulder. Not an embrace, not a performance, just my hand on my son's shoulder. The same shoulder I'd put my hand on when he was 8 years old, crossing a stream in the Cascades, because he didn't want to admit he was afraid of the current. "I didn't take your future away," I said. My voice came out low and even meant only for him. "I just stopped holding it up for you," and Ryan's throat worked. His jaw tightened against whatever was trying to come up through it. He gave one short, slow nod, not agreement exactly, but understanding. The kind of nod that means I hear you and I know, and I'm not going to be able to speak right now all at once. I picked up my coffee, walked to my office at the end of the hall, the one with the window that looked out over Puget Sound, sat down, opened my laptop, took the first sip of Pete's coffee, and began my day. At noon, I walked back through the bullpen on my way to lunch. Ryan was on the phone. His voice was different from any version I'd heard in years. No CEO polish, no sales energy, no performance of authority. Just a man talking to a client, steady and direct, working through a logistics problem, one piece at a time. Getting it right because he was actually paying attention to it, not because he was trying to impress anyone. I slowed my steps just enough to hear a few words. Then I kept walking through the glass doors and into the elevator, and down to the street where Pete's cart was doing its lunchtime rush, and the sound glittered cold and gray beyond the buildings. I stood on the sidewalk with my coat collar up against the January wind, and I thought about a bird feeder in Portland that needed refilling, and a 3-bedroom house with a repaired kitchen floor, and a photograph of a woman who had always known exactly what kind of man I was, even when I'd forgotten. And I thought, this isn't the ending. This is what comes after the ending. The part nobody talks about, the ordinary. Tuesday of it, the showing up and the doing the work, and the long, unglamorous process of becoming someone your father could be proud of. Ryan was going to have to find that out for himself. But for the first time in a very long time, I believed he was going to. I finished my coffee, tossed the cup, and walked back inside. There are things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had sat Ryan down 20 years ago and told him the truth about the money, about the hand I kept putting under him, about what I was actually hoping he would become. Maybe it would have changed something. Maybe it wouldn't have. But I never gave either of us the chance to find out. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: don't wait until the room is on fire to have the conversation that could have prevented it. I thought silence was protection. What it actually was distance. And distance given enough time becomes a wall neither side knows how to climb. I believe in family justice, not the kind that comes from courts or contracts, but the kind that comes from truth finally being spoken out loud, no matter how late. God has a way of arranging the timing of things so that the lesson lands exactly when it needs to. I didn't plan December 5th. I just showed up honestly, and the rest took care of itself. People ask me if I consider myself a revenge dad. I don't. A revenge dad burns things down. I just stopped holding something up that needed to learn to stand on its own. That's not revenge. That's love with a spine. Family justice doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like a 69-year-old man putting his hand on his son's shoulder in a quiet office and saying the only thing left worth saying. If this story of a revenge dad and family justice moved something in you, leave a comment below and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. There are more stories coming, and some of them will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. It means more than you know. A note before our next story: some of the narratives on this channel contain fictional elements crafted for storytelling and reflection. If that's not what you're looking for today, no hard feelings, step away and find what serves you. But if you're staying, we're glad you're here.